Josette Vachon was 20 years old when she buried her husband. When his family divided what was left, they gave her one thing, and they made her sign for it: a flooded quarry on the edge of town, black water in a hole in the ground, carried on the county books at $4. His mother read that number out loud so everyone at the table could hear it, and his brother laughed until he had to put his coffee down. Josette signed. Then she drove out to the pit, sat on the ledge with her father's old-sounding line, and dropped the lead into the dark to see how deep the joke went. 62 feet. And what was waiting down there was the thing that family had spent 60 years agreeing not to remember. The meeting happened 8 days after the funeral, in the front office of the monument company, at a conference table with a slab of polished black granite for a top. Josie had never sat at that table before. In 11 months of marriage, she had been in that building maybe 6 times. Always standing, always on her way somewhere else. They had put out coffee in the good cups. That was the part that stayed with her afterward. Somebody had made a pot of coffee and set out the cups with the gold rims for a meeting about what her husband had left behind. The accountant sat at one end with a folder. Palmira Sartori sat at the other, in a gray sweater, hands folded. Carlo took the chair to his mother's right and turned it slightly so he was facing the window instead of Josie. "This is a distribution schedule," the accountant said. "It isn't a will. Enzo didn't leave a will. What he had was a 9% interest in the family holdings, which, under the operating agreement, reverts to the company on death, with the company obligated to pay fair value to the surviving spouse." "All right," Josie said. "Fair value has been calculated." He turned the folder around and slid it down the length of the granite. "The company's position is that the 9% carries no positive value at this time. Liabilities exceed book. That figure is on page 2. Josie looked at page 2. There was a number on it with a minus sign in front of it. "So he was worth less than nothing," she said. "The interest was," the accountant said. "Not your husband." Carlo made a small sound with his mouth that was not quite a laugh. "We'd still like you to sign a release," Palmira said. "It closes the estate. It protects everyone." "A release from what?" "From any future claim against the company." Palmira's voice was pleasant, the same voice she used with customers picking out lettering. "It's standard. Every family does it." "A release requires consideration," the accountant said. "Legally, you have to receive something for signing. So the company is conveying a parcel of real property to you outright." Carlo turned his chair back around. Josie understood later that he had been waiting for this part the whole time. "Parcel 9, the accountant read. 22 acres west side of the town line, flooded excavation. No road frontage, no developable acreage, no water rights. The town carries it on the grand list at $4. The room went quiet for about 2 seconds. $4, Palmira said. She said it slowly, and then she let it sit there so nobody at the table would miss it. Carlo laughed. He laughed until he had to set the gold-rimmed cup down on the granite, and then he wiped under his eye with the heel of his hand and said, Sorry. It's just, that's the deep cut. That's a hole full of water, Josie. You know that, right? You grew up out there. I know what it is. 22 acres of nothing. You can't build on it, you can't log it, you can't drain it. You'll pay $4 a year in taxes on it forever, and someday your kids will wonder what you were thinking. He picked the cup back up. But hey, it's yours. Carlo, Palmira said, without any real correction in it. Josie signed. She signed because the release was 2 pages and she had $11 in her checking account, and because one more minute in that chair was going to cost her more than the parcel was worth. She wrote her name the way her father had taught her to write it on a work order, printed clean underneath so nobody could argue about it later. The accountant took the folder back. Palmira stood and put out her hand, and Josie shook it, and Palmira said, You'll want to change your name back eventually. Most girls do. Outside, the sky was the flat white of March in Vermont. Josie sat in her car in the Monument Company lot with the deed on the passenger seat, and did not cry because she had used all of that up in the first 4 days, and there was nothing left in the tank. She had married Enzo Sartori at 19. They had been married 11 months and 9 days. He had been hauling a load of finished monuments down the post road at 6 in the morning on the 2nd of March, and the road had glazed over in the night, and a pickup coming the other way had crossed the center line, and Enzo had gone into the guardrail and through it. He was 23 years old. The state trooper who came to the door had been 2 classes ahead of her in school, and he cried harder than she did. Josie had grown up half a mile from the pit that was now hers. Her father ran the dewatering pumps at the deep cut for the last 9 years it operated, and then for 6 years after that he kept the pumps running anyway, part-time. on the company's smallest paycheck, because somebody had to keep the water off the old bench where the equipment sat. When the company finally shut the pumps off for good, they gave him a jacket. She had done her homework in that pump house. Hot diesel and wet rock was the smell of her whole childhood, and she could bleed an airlock out of a suction line before she could drive. Her father died when she was 16. The pump house was gone now, taken down for the copper. The room she rented sat above the laundromat on the short side of the square. $80 a week, hot water shared with the machines below. In a coffee can on the windowsill, she had $312, which was the entire distance between her and the parking lot behind the diner where she worked. Split shifts. She drove out to the pit that same afternoon. The gate was a farm gate with a chain and a padlock, and the padlock had rusted open years ago and nobody had ever noticed. The fence ran maybe 40 feet on either side of the gate, and then just stopped. Out of money. Beyond it, the access road went up a low grade through scrub maple and then leveled out onto the bench, and then the ground simply ended. She parked and walked to the edge. The deep cut was a rectangle. That was the first thing that always surprised people about a marble quarry. It was not a bowl or a crater, it was a room, cut square, with vertical walls of white and gray rock going straight down into water so dark it looked like a lid. Channeling marks ran down those walls in even vertical stripes, the record of a saw that had gone through the mountain a slice at a time, and the stripes disappeared under the surface and kept going. The water did not move. Nothing about it moved. There was a bloom of green along one wall where a spring came in, and a birch that had grown out of a seam and died, and everything else was just white rock and black water. Josie sat down on the ledge with her boots hanging over and unwound her father's sounding line. It was a piece of tarred cord on a wooden reel with a 5-pound lead on the end, shaped like a bell. Her father had knotted it every foot and dyed a knot red at every 10. He had made it himself the winter before she was born, and he had used it every single working day, because a pump man does not guess how much water he is moving. He measures it, and then he writes it down. She let the lead go and the cord ran out through her hand, cold and stiff. She counted the red knots as they went by. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. 2 more feet after the 6th, and the cord went slack. 62 feet. She pulled it up hand over hand and coiled it in her lap and sat there with her palm on the wet lead, looking at a rectangle of water that was worth $4. You'll want to stand back from that edge. Josie turned. A man was coming up the access road on foot with a clipboard under his arm and a coil of yellow rope over his shoulder. He was 50-something, gray at the sides, built like somebody who had been carrying heavy things his whole life and had recently started to notice. It's undercut, he said. The whole west lip is undercut about 4 feet. You can't see it from up there because you're standing on it. Josie stood up and moved back 3 steps. Better, he said. He came the rest of the way and stopped a good distance off, which she appreciated. Grady Lindquist. I do the culvert inspection for the town twice a year, spring and fall, which means twice a year I walk up here and look at a pipe and write down that the pipe is fine. Josie Vashon. He looked at her for a second longer than a stranger would have. Sartori, he said. You're the one who married the Sartori kid. I was. I'm sorry. That was a bad one. He said it plainly and then he moved off it, which was the kindest thing anybody had done for her in 8 days. He nodded at the reel in her hand. That's a sounding line. It was my father's. Vachon, he said the name to himself. He ran the pumps here, until they shut them off. I met him twice. Once he pulled a truck out of the ditch down at the bottom of this road with a come-along and a maple tree, and I have thought about that maneuver probably once a year ever since. Grady set the rope coil down. What'd you get? 62. Huh. He looked at the water. I'd have said 55. What are you sounding it for? Because I own it, Josie said. Grady turned his head. As of about 2 hours ago. The family conveyed it to me. 20. 2 acres. She heard her own voice go flat and did not try to fix it. They value it at $4. $4, Grady said. They read it out loud. He was quiet for a moment, then he picked up the rope and slung it back over his shoulder and said, Well, come on down and look at your culvert then. It's the only part of this place that does anything. They walked down the grade together and out along the base of the spoil pile to where a concrete head wall stood in the brush with a 30-inch pipe through it. A thin thread of water came out of it and disappeared into the leaves. That's the overflow, Grady said. Somebody drove that pipe through the ridge in 1938 so the pit wouldn't come over the low side and take out the road. When the water in there gets above a certain level, it starts running out of here. That's why you've got 62 feet and not 68. This hole is full to its own brim, and it has been that way since before either of us was born. And that's all it does. That's all it does. Best behaved thing in my whole inspection list. He crouched and put 2 fingers in the outflow. Runs a little cold, though. Always has. That's deep water. Josie looked back up the grade at the white lip of the pit. "Can I ask you something?" she said. "You've lived here your whole life. 54 years of it. What do people say happened here?" Grady stood up and wiped his hand on his jeans. "You mean white at clothes?" "Yes. Same as everybody says." He shrugged. "The old man drowned it. Ottavio Sartori. 62, 63, somewhere in there. The story is the culvert on the uphill side let go in a spring storm, and the pit took water faster than they could pump it. And by the time it stopped raining, they were sitting on a swimming pool. And the old man was supposed to bring in bigger pumps and rent a barge and get back down to the seam. And he wouldn't do it. Sat in his truck up on that bench for a year and let it fill. Company never recovered. His son sold off the derricks and moved everything to the monument end, and that's the business they've got today. Why wouldn't he do it? Depends who's telling it. Half the town says he lost his mind after the flood. Other half says he was a stubborn old goat who'd rather lose a quarry than admit he built the culvert wrong. Grady picked up his clipboard. Everybody agrees on that story, which is usually a sign nobody checked it. Josie looked at him. "That's not me being clever," he said. "That's 40 years of inspecting things people told me were fine." He wrote something on the clipboard, and then he tore a corner off the bottom of the page and wrote a phone number on it and held it out to her. "What's this for?" "Nothing," Grady said. "You're 20 years old and you own a 62-foot hole full of water with an undercut edge, and you were sitting on that edge alone with nobody knowing where you were. Take the number." She took it. It was almost dark when she got back to the room above the laundromat. The machines were running below, and the whole floor had that warm shudder to it, which she had hated in November and had come to be grateful for. She had not opened the box. It had come home from the funeral in the back of her car with Enzo's coat and his work boots and the contents of the drawer beside his side of the bed, and she had put it in the closet under a folded blanket. And for 8 days she had gotten dressed in front of that closet without looking down. She took it out and sat with it on the floor. There was a phone with a cracked case, a receipt from the hardware store for a box of drywall screws he had never used, 2 ticket stubs, his watch, which had stopped, a birthday card she had given him in June with a drawing on the inside that was supposed to be a dog and was not. At the bottom, under all of it, flat against the cardboard, was the book. He had given it to her at their wedding, not at the reception, where there were people. He had given it to her that morning in the kitchen of the apartment they had just moved into, before either of them was dressed, and he had been so embarrassed about it that he had made the whole thing into a joke. "It's a book about rocks," he had said. "It is the most boring present that any man has ever given any woman. My great-grandfather wrote it. It's the only thing of his they let me keep, and I only got it because it was in a footlocker, and nobody knew what was in the footlocker. It was canvas-bound, about the size of a hymnal, the cloth gone the color of a paper bag. The corners were soft. It smelled like a cellar and like machine oil." Then he had said the other thing. He had said it fast, still embarrassed, already turning to the sink. He wrote everything down. "So do you." And she had laughed at him and put it on the shelf. Josie sat on the floor of the rented room with the laundromat running underneath her and opened the front cover for the first time in 11 months and 9 days. Enzo's handwriting was on the flyleaf, in pencil, crooked, 4 words and her name. She had to stop for a while after that. When she could, she turned the page. The first page was a column of numbers in a different hand entirely. An old man's hand, small and square and absolutely regular. Every line started with a number and then gave 4 measurements, and then a letter, and then 2 initials. Line after line, page after page, the same shape repeating, 1, then a set of dimensions, then the letter S, then 2 initials, 2, dimensions, S, initials, 3. She turned pages with her thumb, fast, watching the numbers climb. 40, 90, 160, 220. The handwriting never changed and never got tired. The numbers stopped at 300. After that came 11 blank pages. And then, near the back, 1 more page with writing on it. And this one was different. This one had been written in a hurry, in ink instead of pencil, and there was a map drawn on it in pencil underneath the words, a rectangle with rows of little squares inside it, and a compass arrow in the corner. Josie held the book closer to the lamp and started to read. The date at the top said April the 11th, 1962, and under it, in that same small square hand, it said this: bottom bench cleared and swept. 300 blocks cut, squared, dressed, and numbered, staged in 10 rows of 30 at the north end of the floor, awaiting the derrick. Grade S throughout. No dry seam, no stun, no bad corner in the lot. This is the best white this hole will ever make, and there is nothing behind them. Face pinched out on the 9th. Rows run west to east as drawn. Underneath was the map, a pencil rectangle for the pit, and inside it, at one end, 10 neat rows of little squares, 30 to a row, drawn with a straight edge. There was a compass arrow in the corner and a note beside the rows that said, from the north wall, 12 feet. Below the map, in the same ink but with the letters gone loose and slanted, there were 3 more entries. April the 23rd. Pipe let go at the head of the draw sometime in the night. Water was over the bottom bench by 5 in the morning and over the second bench by noon. Both pumps run wide open and could not hold her. By dark it was 40 feet and climbing, and we quit. May the 2nd. Man from the highway job offering $9 a ton for the staged lot as riprap and bridge fill. 300 blocks of statuary white to be broke up under a bridge approach. I told him no. My son says I am finishing what the water started. Let him say it. And then the last one. 3 lines down, in a hand so steady it looked printed. Water keeps stone better than men do. It will hold them until somebody comes along who knows what he is looking at. Pumps off today. O.S. Josie read it 4 times. Then she got up off the floor and went to the window, and stood there looking down at the square, at the one streetlight in the closed hardware store and her own car with the deed still lying on the passenger seat, and she said out loud, "To nobody, that's a hole full of water, Josie." She did not sleep. Around 2 in the morning she gave up and made tea in the little electric kettle and sat with the book open on the bed and read every one of the 300 lines. Each line had a number, then 4 measurements, then the letter S, then 2 initials. The measurements were mostly in the same range, something like 60 by 36 by 30 inches, over and over, with a few bigger ones and a few odd ones. The initials changed. There were maybe 9 sets of initials in the whole book repeating, and she guessed those were the men who had set each block on the floor. The first line in the book said 1, and then the measurements, and then S, and then RL. At 6, she walked down to the diner and worked the breakfast shift and put $4 and change in her apron pocket in tips. And at 10:30, she took off the apron and walked across the square to the town office. The clerk was patient with her, which was not something Josie had expected. Parcel 9, the woman said, running a finger down a column. West side of the town line. Yep, transferred a week ago Tuesday. She looked up over her glasses. To you. That's right. Congratulations, I guess. The clerk got up and pulled a long flat drawer out of a cabinet and laid a plat map on the counter. That's your outline there. 22 acres and change. The pit itself is 6 acres of it. The rest is that spoil ground and the strip along the road. Is there anything else on file? Anything about the quarry when it was running? Not here. Town's got tax cards and surveys, and that's about it. The clerk squared the map up with her hands. You want the old company stuff? You want the historical society? They've got about 40 boxes in the back of the library that nobody's touched since the bicentennial. The Historical Society was 2 rooms behind the library's reading area, and the woman who ran it was there on Tuesdays and Thursdays and had a heater going in March. Marble, the woman said. Which quarry? The deep cut. Oh, that's a good one. Nobody ever asks about that one. She stood up and went to a shelf and came back with a green cardboard box. Newspapers are on the film reader, but the clippings file is faster if you know your year. What's your year? 1962. The woman found it in about 90 seconds, which told Josie the file had been organized by somebody who cared. The clipping was 4 column inches. It ran on a Thursday in late April, 1962, and the headline said, "Quarry floods on town line. Sartori says scene played out." Josie read it standing up. The story said a culvert at the head of the draw had failed during a night of heavy rain and that the deep cut had taken on water for 11 hours before the crew gave up. It said the pit was a total loss. It said the company had no plans to dewater, and then it had a quote, and the quote was from Ottavio Sartori's son. "The bottom scene played out 3 weeks ago," he said. "We were finishing up down there anyway. There was nothing on the floor. All we lost was equipment." Josie stood in the back room of the library with the heater ticking and read that one sentence 6 or 7 times. There was nothing on the floor. She got a photocopy for a dime, and then she went back to the room above the laundromat and laid the photocopy on the bed next to the block book, opened to April the 11th, and looked at the two of them together. 300 blocks staged in 10 rows of 30 at the north end of the floor. There was nothing on the floor. One of those was a lie, and both of them had been written down by men in the same family within 12 days of each other. She got out her spiral notebook and started a page and wrote at the top of it, in her own hand, "Things I can prove." And underneath that, she wrote a very short list, and then she looked at how short it was for a while. On Friday, she went to the monument company to pick up Enzo's last paycheck, which was for 9 days of work in February and which she needed. The front office had a display floor, 6 polished uprights standing on carpet with sample lettering on them, and a bench where people sat while they picked out what their mother's stone was going to say. There was a woman on the bench when Josie came in. She had a boys' school photograph in a plastic sleeve on her knee, and she was holding it with both hands. Palmyra was at the desk with a price sheet. $600 is the base, Palmyra was saying. That's the stone, the polish, and 1 line. Anything past 1 line is charged by the letter. Setting is extra because we have to send 2 men. I understand that, the woman said. I'm asking about the payments. We don't do payments. $50 a month. I'd have it done in a year and a half. We don't do payments, Palmyra said again, in the pleasant voice. We had to stop. People start, and then they don't finish, and we're left with a stone that has somebody else's name on it. There's no market for that. The woman sat there for a second. He was 19. I know he was, and I'm very sorry. You could look at the flat markers. Those start at 220. He's not getting a flat marker. Then it's 600, Palmyra said, and I'd take a deposit today because the price goes up in June. Josie stood by the door with her hands in her jacket pockets and did not say anything because she had $11 in her checking account and no standing in that room at all. The woman got up and put the photograph back in her purse and left, and the little bell over the door rang. Palmyra looked up and saw Josie, and her face did the thing it did, which was to become extremely polite. Your check's in the envelope on the corner there. Thank you. You should know we're getting calls, Palmyra said. People asking if it's true you've got the deep cut. Which it is, of course, but I'd rather you didn't go out there anymore. Why is that? Because if somebody follows you out there and falls in, this family's name is on 6 decades of paperwork about that hole, and yours has been on it for 9 days. Palmyra capped her pen. Be sensible. Josie took the envelope and went out. In the car, she wrote in the notebook, woman on the bench, boy 19, $600, no payments. And she did not know why she was writing it down except that her father had written down everything, including the things he could not do anything about yet. She called the number on the torn corner of paper that night. Lindquist. It's Josie Vashon. From the pit. 62 feet, Grady said. I remember. Can I show you something? It'll take 20 minutes and I'm going to sound insane for about the first 10 of them. There was a pause. Come by the shop tomorrow after 4. It's the metal building behind the fuel depot. Bring whatever it is. The shop had a compressor going, and 3 tanks in a rack and a wetsuit hanging off a hook like a shed skin, and Grady cleared a space on the bench with his forearm and Josie put the block book down on it. He read the April the 11th page standing up, with his hands behind his back, not touching it. Then he said, show me the front. She turned it to the first page. He put 1 finger down next to line 1, not on the paper. Just above it, grade S, initials RL. Grady did not say anything for a long time. Josie watched him not say it. That's my father, he said finally. You're sure? There were 3 Lindquists in this town in 1962, and 2 of them were girls. He straightened up. He set stone here for 9 years before he went into the shed. Talked about the bottom bench my whole childhood. Said it was the whitest thing he ever put his hands on, and that they never got to send any of it anywhere. Did he ever say how much of it there was? He never said a number. Grady put both hands flat on the bench. He said they left it. That's the word he used. Left. There's 300 of them in that book. I can count, Grady said. He went and got a mug that already had coffee in it and drank some of it cold and came back. Here's what I want you to understand, he said. I dive bridge piers and dam gates. That water is a rock quarry, which means it's clear as gin and cold as a well, and 62 feet is nothing. 62 feet is a warm-up. But it also means there's no current to move silt. So whatever's on that floor has had a lifetime of dust settling on it. And it means there's a wall of rock all the way around with an undercut lip, and there is nobody within 8 miles if I get in trouble. I'm not asking you to. You called me at 9 o'clock at night, Grady said. You're asking me. Josie looked at the floor of the shop. One tank, he said. One look. I go down the north wall, I run a line out 12 feet, and I put my hand on whatever's there. And if there's nothing down there but mud and an old cable spool, you are buying my breakfast every Sunday until I die. Deal. Sunday morning. Early, so nobody comes up that road and asks me what I'm doing. Carlo came up that road on Saturday. Josie was at the pit with a tape measure and a can of orange marking paint, walking the top of the north wall and putting a mark every 10 feet, when the truck came over the grade and stopped and Carlo got out and left the door open. What are you doing? Measuring the north wall. For what? Because I own it, Josie said, and I don't know how long it is. Carlo looked at the orange marks going away down the lip. He was in a canvas coat with the company name embroidered on the chest, and he had shaved that morning, which he did not always do. Ma says you were in the office. I picked up Enzo's check. Right. He put his hands in his pockets. Josie, I want to say something and I want it to come out right, so give me a second. He looked at the water. I know how it went in that meeting. I laughed, and I shouldn't have. That was 8 days after my brother's funeral, and I have no idea why I did it. And I've thought about it since, which is more than I usually do. Josie waited. But that thing is a liability, he said. It's a hole. It's an insurance question. If you're out here painting the edges, I've got to tell my agent, and my agent is going to tell me to build a real fence around 22 acres, and I don't have the money for a real fence, and neither do you. It's not your insurance anymore. It's my last name on every piece of paper about it since 1938. He said it without heat. That's how a small town works. You know that. Carlo, she said, did your family ever get anything out of the bottom of that pit? He turned around. What? Before it flooded, was there anything down there? There was a hole in the ground with water coming into it. Carlo said, that's the whole story. My great-grandfather sat up here for a year and lost the company, and my grandfather spent his whole life digging out from under it. He got back in the truck. Don't paint any more marks. It looks like you're planning something. The transmission on Josie's car had been slipping since January, and on Saturday afternoon she took her father's socket set to the flea market at the fairgrounds and sold it to a man with a folding table for $90, which was less than half what it was worth, and was $90. She kept the sounding line. She never even considered the sounding line. That night her phone buzzed with a number she did not have saved. It's Nella, Enzo's sister. Carlo told Mom you were out at the cut measuring things, and she made a phone call about it. I don't know who to. Just so you know. Josie sat on the edge of the bed and typed back, thank you, and then deleted it and typed, thanks. Do you need anything? And sent that instead because the girl was 17 and had also lost a brother, and nobody in that house had asked her a question in 8 days either. The reply took a while. No. Do you? Sunday came in cold and gray with a wind that had nothing to push against up on the bench. Grady backed his truck to the ledge at 6:10 and rigged a line off the tow hook and threw the coil over the edge. And it went down and hung there straight as a plumb bob in water that did not move at all. He suited up out of the back of the truck without hurrying. Josie held things when he handed them to her. You've got a watch on? He said. Yes. Look at it now. He pulled the hood up over his ears. Down and back is 15 minutes. I hit 20, that means I found something and I'm being a fool about it. I hit 30, you drive to the fire station and you don't stop for the light. 30, Josie said. Say it back. 15, 20, 30. Fire station. Good. He put the regulator in his mouth, took it out again and set around the mouthpiece. 12 feet off the north wall. 12 feet. He sat down on the lip, held his mask, and went in. The splash was loud in a way Josie was not ready for, and then the water swallowed it and went flat again in about 4 seconds. She got down on her knees on the wet rock and watched the bubbles. They came up in a slow silver chain, thick at first, right below her. Then the chain started to lean, and it walked away from the wall out across the middle of that black rectangle, a little farther with every breath. She looked at her watch. 6:19. The bubbles kept going out and got smaller and farther apart. And then they stopped. The surface of the water closed over the last of them and went perfectly still. At 6:26, there was nothing. 5 minutes later, there was still nothing, and Josie had her keys in her hand and was doing the arithmetic on how long it took to get down that grade and out to the highway. At 6:34, the water broke about 60 feet out, and Grady came up backward with his head tipped and hung there on his back for a minute, without saying anything at all. He swam in slow, coming up the line hand over hand. He got a knee onto the ledge, and Josie took the weight off him, and he sat down on the wet rock with his legs still in the water and pulled the mask off his face. He did not look happy. That was the part Josie was not expecting. He looked like a man who had been hit. "Are you all right?" "Yeah." He got the hood back off his ears. "Yeah." "Give me a second." She gave him a second. "I went down the wall," Grady said. "It's a clean drop. No ledges, all the way. Bottom's flat. There's an inch of dust on everything, and it's the finest dust I've ever been in. It goes up in a cloud off nothing. So I stayed off it, and I swam. Ran my line off the north wall, like you said, 12 feet. And there's a wall down there that isn't a wall." Josie sat down on the rock beside him. "It's a stack," he said. "It's rows. They're squared. They're the same size. They're set too high with a hand's width between them so you could get a chain in there. I went along the front of it, and it just kept going." He held his hands out in front of him, about a foot apart, and looked at the space between them. "I fanned the dust off the top of one with my glove. Under the dust it's white, not gray, not green, white like the inside of a tooth. Did you count?" "I didn't count. I was down there 11 minutes, and I spent 4 of them not believing it." He turned his head and looked at her. "But I did something better than count." "What?" "There's a number chiseled in the corner of every one of them. Top face, left corner, about 2 inches tall." Grady wiped his mouth with the back of his hand. "Get the book." Josie went to the truck and got the book out of the cab, and Grady stood up and dripped all over the tailgate, and she opened it flat and held the pages down with both hands against the wind. 41, he said. She found it. 60 by 30, 6 by 30. S initials DM. 60 by 30, 6 by 30. Grady nodded once. "That's about right for what I was looking at. Next one over, same row. 42. 60 by 36 by 30. S, same initials. Same man setting his row. Okay." He put a finger down on the tailgate. "Now, I swam back 3 rows toward the middle, so that's 3 rows in, and I picked one out of the front and read it. This is the one I want you to check, because if this one lands, I'm going to need to sit down again." "What is it?" 118. Josie turned pages. Her hands were not steady, and she made herself slow down and go 1 page at a time instead of thumbing through. She found it. 118, she read, 72 by 36 by 30. S. Initials RL. Nobody said anything. 72, not 60. It was the only one of the 3 that was a different size, and Grady had picked it out of the front of a row in the dark under 62 feet of water and read a number off a corner, and the book said it was longer than its neighbors. And it was. "That's my father's block," Grady said. "Yes. 72 inches, 6 foot. That's a 2-man block." He put both hands on the tailgate and leaned on them. 60 years down there, and it's cleaner than the day they cut it. Josie looked out at the water. It was doing what it always did, which was nothing. "They're all still there," she said. "Every one of them, unless somebody's been down there with a barge. And nobody has been down there with a barge because I'd have heard about it before I was born." If you've made it this far into Josie's story, hit subscribe because what happens next is the part I've been waiting to tell you. For about 4 days, Josie was rich. Not in any way that showed. She still worked breakfast and she still counted the coffee can. But there is a kind of quiet that comes over a person who knows a thing nobody else knows. And she had it, and it lasted exactly until she started making phone calls. The first outfit she called was a dewatering contractor 2 hours south. The man was friendly for about 90 seconds. 6 acres of surface, he said. "How deep?" 62 feet. 62. She could hear him writing, "rock walls." So it's not a pond, it's a box. That's what, north of 100 million gallons of water. Is it? It's a lake standing on its end is what it is. Papers moved. Okay. 2 questions and they're both the same question. Where does it go? And who says you can put it there? I don't understand. You can't pump 100 million gallons of anything into a stream in Vermont without a discharge permit. And the permit will take you a year and it may not come. You'd be moving water that's been sitting on rock since before the interstate went in. So they'll want it tested. And if it comes back with anything in it at all, you're not pumping, you're treating. That's a different business, and it's a bigger number. He paused. And that's before I tell you what the pumping costs. Tell me what the pumping costs. he told her. It was 6 figures. It was 6 figures before the permit, before the testing, before the fuel. And it assumed the pit did not fill back up. And the pit was going to fill back up because there was a spring coming in through the west wall that had been running since before anybody in that town was born. Josie called 2 more. The second one laughed politely. The third one gave her a smaller number and then explained that the smaller number was for 100 days of pumping and that at the end of the 100 days, she would be about a third of the way down. She sat in the car outside the diner with the phone in her lap. 300 blocks of the whitest stone anybody had ever put their hands on, 62 feet down, in a hole she owned outright, and it might as well have been on the moon. It was the woman at the Historical Society who broke it open, and she did it without knowing she was doing it. Josie had gone back for the newspaper film, wanting the whole page instead of the clipping, and while the reader was warming up, the woman said, "From the other room, you're the second person to ask me about that bottom seam, you know." Josie put her hand flat on the table. Who was the first? Oh, a couple of years ago now. A woman came in, out-of-state plates. Very nice. Very organized. She was doing some kind of restoration, and she wanted to know if there was anything left of that white. She had photographs with her of a building. The woman came in wiping her hands on a paper towel. She spent a whole afternoon in here. Then I sent her over to the monument office, because I figured they'd know better than my boxes would. What did they tell her? I never heard. She didn't come back. The woman thought about it. Well, that's not true. She came back for about 2 minutes to give me her card and ask me to call if I ever found anything, and she looked like somebody had just wasted her whole trip. Do you still have the card? I never throw anything out. That's the entire job. It took 11 minutes. The card was in a folder marked correspondence, unanswered, and it said Tova Brill, and under the name it said Preservation Architect, and there was an office address in a city 3 states west. Josie called from the payphone habit her father had left her, which meant she called standing up, with a pen in her hand, and she said what she had to say in the first 15 seconds because that was all anybody ever gave you. My name is Josette Vachon. I own the quarry on the town line in Chesley, Vermont, the one you came looking at 2 years ago. I have a 1962 inventory book with 300 cut blocks in it, grade S, and a diver who has been on the bottom and read 3 of the numbers off the corners, and all 3 matched the book. There was a silence on the other end that went on so long Josie thought the call had dropped. Then Tova Brill said in a completely level voice, "Say the word grade again." "Grade S." "S," Tova said. "Do you know what S is?" "No." "I'll be there Thursday." She came Thursday in a rented sedan that was wrong for that road, and she got out of it in the mud at the bottom of the grade and walked up rather than risk the car. Small woman in her 40s, canvas coat, camera bag. She did not look at the water first. She looked at the walls. "Oh," she said. "Oh, look at those channel marks." They sat in Grady's shop that afternoon with the book open on the bench, and Tova Brill read it for 40 minutes without speaking, not skimming. She read every line with a mechanical pencil in her hand that she never once wrote with. Then she closed it and put both hands on the cover and said, "All right, I'm going to explain something, and I need you to let me do it badly because I've been trying to explain it to people for 4 years, and I've never once gotten it right." "Go ahead," Josie said. "You can buy marble anywhere." Tova held up one finger. "Anywhere. There's white marble coming out of Italy and Greece and Turkey and Georgia and Colorado and Vermont. Today, this morning, by the boatload. Marble is not rare. Marble is a commodity." "Okay. Now." She held up the second finger. In 1911, a city 3 states from here built a public library and faced the whole thing in white marble out of this hole. The whole thing. 22,000 square feet of facing, all from one seam, all cut inside about 18 months, which means it all has the same grain and the same crystal and the same almost nothing of gray in it. So from across the street, the entire building reads as one piece of stone. "And it's falling apart," Josie said. "It's spalling. Water gets in behind the anchors and freezes and pushes the face off in sheets. We're losing 30 or 40 pieces a winter." Tova opened the camera bag and put a photograph on the bench, and then a second one. "That's the north elevation. That's a detail of the same elevation. You see the light patches." Josie looked. There were 11 or 12 rectangles in the wall that were a different white from the wall around them. And once she saw them, she could not stop seeing them. "That's 4 years of my life," Tova said. "That's Georgia white. That's Colorado. That's 2 different Italians and a Vermont Danby that I had real hopes for. Every one of them is a beautiful stone. Every one of them is the wrong stone. Put them in that wall, and they read as damage. They read as scar tissue. Can't you dye it?" You can dye it, and in 6 years the dye is gone and the patch is worse than it was, and now you've also got a coating on the historic fabric. Tova put the photographs away. You can buy marble anywhere. You cannot buy the same mountain twice. That's the whole problem, and it isn't only my building. There are 19 structures in this country I know about that are faced out of this hole, and every single one of them is patching itself with the wrong white and pretending it isn't. Grade S, Josie said. Statuary, said Tova. It's the top grade. It's the stone they'd sell to a carver, no veining, no dry seam, no stun, which is the little internal fracture you get from bad blasting. A quarry that's running well might grade 5% of what it takes out as statuary. She tapped the book. That man cut 300 blocks and graded every single one of them S. If that's true, and if the diver is right, then what is under your water is the largest matched lot of American statuary marble that exists anywhere, and it is already cut, and it is already squared, and it was done by 9 men who are all dead. Grady, who had been leaning against the doorframe of the shop the whole time, said, "Ask her about the water." Tova turned. "What about the water? All that time underwater. Does that ruin it?" Tova actually laughed. "It's the best thing that could have happened to it. Marble outdoors in Vermont gets rained on, and rain is slightly acidic, and it gets frozen and thawed 150 times a winter, and it gets sun. Under still water at 40-some degrees, it gets none of that." She shook her head. "If you'd stacked those blocks in a field in 1962, they'd be sugaring right now. Under that water, they're in a bank vault." Nobody in that shop said anything for a moment. The compressor came on and ran and shut off again. "How long have you been looking?" Josie asked. "For this stone, longer than I like to say out loud, but I came here 2 springs ago." Tova picked up her pencil and put it in her coat pocket. "I want to be careful how I say this because I don't know your situation." "Say it." "I sat in the office of the monument company on the main street of this town, and I put those same 2 photographs on that desk, and a woman looked at them and told me that the bottom seam had played out in 1961, and there was nothing in that pit but water and equipment, and that if there had been anything down there, her family would hardly have left it." Tova picked up her bag. I thanked her. I drove 11 hours home, and I have thought about this town every week since. Josie found she was holding the edge of the bench. "That woman is my mother-in-law," she said. "News in a place that size does not travel exactly. It seeps." Somebody at the fuel depot saw a rented sedan with out-of-state plates parked at Grady's shop, and somebody at the diner heard Josie ask about a notary, and the woman at the Historical Society, who had done nothing wrong at all, mentioned to a friend that wasn't it something how the same building had come up twice in 2 years. The letter came 9 days later, on a Tuesday by certified mail to the room above the laundromat, and Josie had to sign for it in the doorway with the laundromat running behind her. It was 2 pages from a law office in Rutland, and it was polite the whole way through. The client, it said, was the Sartori Family Company, and the company had recently become aware of an assertion regarding cut stones situated on Parcel 9. In the spring of 1962, the company had quarried, cut, dressed and staged a quantity of dimension stone on the floor of the excavation. Under settled law, when stone is quarried and severed from the earth, it ceases to be part of the realty and becomes the personal property of the owner who severed it. Personal property does not pass with a conveyance of land unless it is named in the conveyance, and the deed to Parcel 9 named 22 acres and named nothing else. The company therefore owned every block on that floor. Would she please confirm in writing within 14 days that she would not remove, disturb, or permit access to them? Josie read it 3 times standing in the doorway. The second letter came 2 days later, and this one was not from a lawyer. It was from Palmyra, 1 page, handwritten on the company's stationery, and it was almost kind. It said that nobody wanted this to become an ugly thing. Whatever was or was not on the bottom of that pit, the company was prepared to buy Parcel 9 back from her for $40,000, paid in full at closing. No conditions except the usual release. $40,000 was a great deal of money for a young woman starting over. It would be sitting in her account by the end of the month, and Enzo would have wanted her taken care of. That was the last line. Enzo would have wanted her taken care of. Josie drove out to the pit with both letters on the passenger seat where the deed had been, and she parked up on the bench and sat sideways in the open door with her feet on the rock. $40,000. A transmission, a deposit, and first month on something with its own hot water. 2 years of not being afraid on the 5th of the month. She got her pen out of her jacket pocket and clicked it, and sat there in the cold with the pen in her hand and the water not moving at all. She did not sign it that day, but only because she wanted to read it one more time somewhere warm, and that is not the same thing as refusing. The note was taped to her door when she got back. Her landlord had sold the building, and the new owner wanted the second floor for storage. She had 30 days. Josie stood in the hallway with the note in one hand and Palmyra's letter in the other and did the only math there was. $40,000 would put her in an apartment with its own water heater by the middle of May. The other option was a hole in the ground and a lawyer in Rutland, and no address at all. She called Grady at 9 that night and told him she was going to take it. He did not argue. That was what undid her, later. He said, "Okay," and then he was quiet for a bit, and then he said, "Can I tell you a thing about my father, and then I'll hang up?" Yes. He worked in the shed for 26 years after this place closed, sawing headstones. And every couple of years, usually in the winter, he'd say the same sentence at the table. He'd say, "We left it." Grady's voice did not change at all. "That's all, just that." My mother thought he was talking about the tools. I thought he was talking about the tools. He was 71 when he died, and I never once asked him what he meant, because it was just a thing Dad said. Grady. That's it. That's the whole thing. Take the money, Josie. I'd take the money. A pause. Good night. She sat on the bed for a long time after that. At some point, she took the block book off the nightstand and opened the front cover and looked at the 4 words in pencil, and she read them the way she had been reading them for 9 days, which was fast, before they could do anything to her. He wrote everything down. So do you. Enzo had thought that was funny. He had thought it was the funniest thing in the world that his wife kept a spiral notebook of oil change dates and diner shifts and how much a quart of milk cost, and he had teased her about it for 11 months. And then he had given her the one object in his family that was made out of the same habit. Josie got the notebook out of her jacket and turned to the page that said, "Things I can prove," and looked at how short the list still was. Then she wrote a new heading on the next page, and the heading was, "Things They Wrote Down." The lawyer that Tova put her on the phone with was in another state and had a voice like a person reading a menu. "The letter is not a bluff," he said. "Severance is real law and it's old law. Stone in the ground is part of the land. The minute you cut it loose and stack it on the floor, it becomes a chattel, which is to say a movable thing, like a tractor or a pile of lumber. Your deed conveyed 22 acres. It did not convey their tractor. So they win. On that argument alone they win, yes, but there's a second thing that beats the first thing, and it's called abandonment. Paper moved on his end. A chattel can be given up. If the owner walks away with the intention of relinquishing it and never coming back for it, then it's abandoned property, and abandoned property on private land generally belongs to whoever owns the land. How do I prove what somebody intended back in 1962? You almost never can, which is why almost nobody wins this, the lawyer said. You'd need a document, something contemporaneous where the company says, in its own words, "We're not coming back for this." An insurance filing, a board minute, a write-off. He paused. A write-off would be extremely good because a company that takes a tax deduction for losing a thing has a very hard time standing up 2 generations later and saying they never lost it. Where would something like that be? In their attic, he said, or in nobody's attic, and the second one is much more likely. Miss Vachon, I want to be honest with you because Tova asked me to be. Files like that get thrown out. That's 3 generations of somebody's cousin cleaning out an office. Josie wrote it all down. Write-off. Insurance filing, board minute, contemporaneous. Then she sat and looked at the word attic. She texted Nella that night and she was careful about it because the girl was 17 and it was not her fight. Hey, dumb question. Does the office still have old files anywhere, like from the 60s? The 3 dots came and went twice. There's a room over the display floor. It's all boxes. Mom calls it the archive, but it's just where stuff goes. Do you know if anything's in there from when the quarry flooded? Why, Josie looked at that. 1 word for a while. Then she typed the truth, all of it, in 5 messages, and sent them one after another without letting herself stop. And then she put the phone face down on the bed and got up and washed a coffee cup that was already clean. The phone did not buzz for 22 minutes. Then it buzzed once. He gave you that book at your wedding. I was there. He made you open it in the kitchen before anybody came. Josie sat down on the floor. I know. I shouldn't have asked you. Forget it, she typed. The reply came in 11 seconds. No, Nella did it on a Saturday, because the office was closed Saturdays, and she had a key because she had been opening that building since she was 12. She was up there 4 hours. She sent Josie one message at the start that said, "I'm in," and then nothing at all, and Josie worked the whole breakfast shift with her phone in her apron pocket, taking it out between tables like a person waiting on a hospital. At 2 in the afternoon, the pictures started coming. There were 31 of them, taken on a phone in bad light with a girl's shadow across the corner of half of them, and they were the plainest documents in the world. Carbon copies, typed on a manual typewriter with the letters punching through in places. The first one Josie opened was a letter dated the 14th of May, 1962, on the company's old letterhead, addressed to a general contractor in another state. It said that the company regretted to inform them that the bottom seam at the town line quarry had exhausted and that no further stone of the specified grade existed or could be produced. The supply agreement was therefore void for geological cause under the terms of the 4th clause, and the company would retain the advance against costs already incurred. The advance was $9,400. A second document was dated 11 months later, in April of 1963, and it was a schedule attached to a federal return, and it was titled Luce's Casualty. There was one line on it that mattered, and Josie read it standing up in the alley behind the diner in her apron. Dimension stone, cut, dressed, and staged on quarry floor parcel 9, 300 blocks statuary grade. Cost basis $41,400. Salvage value none, recovery not economically possible. Abandoned in place, underneath it, on the signature line, was the name of Ottavio Sartori's son. Josie read it, and then she looked up at the brick wall of the building across the alley, and then she read it again. In May of 1962, the company had told a customer there was no stone and kept $9,400 for stone that did not exist. In April of 1963, the same man had told the federal government there were 300 blocks of statuary marble on that floor and taken a deduction for losing them, and written the words "abandoned in place" with his own hand. Both of those things could not be true. Whichever one was the lie, the family had made money on it. She went back inside and finished her shift, because she needed the shift, and her hands shook through 2 orders and then stopped. She went to the monument office on a Wednesday morning at 9, when the display floor was empty, and she brought 2 photocopies and nothing else. Grady stayed at his shop. The lawyer in the other state had no idea she was going, and neither did Tova. Palmyra was at the desk. Carlo came out of the back when he heard the bell and stopped where he was. "I'm not signing," Josie said. "Then we've got nothing to discuss," Carlo said. "And you can talk to Rutland. I'd like 2 minutes." Palmyra put her pen down. 2 minutes. Josie set the first photocopy on the desk and turned it around so it faced them. "May of 1962, she said. "Your grandfather told a contractor in another state that the seam had run out and there was no stone. He kept $9,400 of their money." Carlo came halfway across the display floor. Josie set the second photocopy down beside the first. "April of 1963, she said. "Same man, same typewriter. 300 blocks, statuary grade, cost basis, $41,400. Salvage none, abandoned in place." He signed it, and he took the deduction. Nobody moved. "You can't have both," Josie said. "Either there was nothing down there, in which case you defrauded a contractor and there's nothing for you to come and get, or there were 300 blocks, in which case your own company put in writing that it was walking away from them, took money from the government for walking away from them, and never put them on a balance sheet again." She straightened the 2 pages so their edges lined up. "Your lawyer is going to tell you that's called abandonment. He's going to tell you a judge reads the second document first." Carlo picked up the tax schedule. He read it, and then he read it again, and his thumb went back and forth over the corner of the page. "Where did you get this?" Palmyra said. "That's not the question you want to ask me." "It is exactly the question I want to ask you." "Then ask your lawyer whether it matters," Josie said. "Because it doesn't." Palmyra stood up. She was a head shorter than Josie, and it had never once mattered. "You have been in this family for 11 months, she said, "and you are standing in my building telling me about my grandfather. I'm telling you about a piece of paper he signed. You have no idea what that man went through, what any of them went through. This company lost a quarry. It lost 31 jobs. It went from 110 men to 9 in 4 winters, and he sat in that chair right there and figured out how to keep 9 of them." Palmyra's hand was flat on the desk. "So he wrote something on a form. Everybody wrote something on a form." "I believe you," Josie said, and she meant it, and it took the wind out of the room in a way that shouting never would have. "I think he was probably out of options, and I think he did what he had to do at the time. But that's not what I came here about." "You didn't lose it," Josie said. "You agreed to forget it." That's a different thing. Palmyra did not answer. Ottavio wrote in that book that the water would hold the stone until somebody came along who knew what he was looking at. 2 years ago, somebody came along who knew exactly what she was looking at, and she sat in that chair with photographs. And you told her there was nothing down there. Josie kept her voice level. Maybe you believed it. I've thought about that a lot, and I think there's a decent chance you believed it. Because your father believed it, and his father made sure of that. But she left this town, and you never picked up a phone. Carlo put the tax schedule down on the desk very carefully. $4, Josie said. That's what you valued it at 8 days after you buried your son. You read the number out loud. You wrote it down yourselves, on a schedule, with an accountant sitting there, and I signed it and you laughed. She picked up her copies and folded them. That's the whole case. Everything I own because your family kept writing numbers on things, so nobody would ever have to go look at them again. She was almost out the door when Carlo said her name. Josie. She stopped. 60-40, he said. We've got the yard, the saws, the trucks, 2 men who've been cutting stone since before you were born, and a name that gets a phone call returned. You've got a hole and a book. 60-40 our way, and this ends this morning. No, 50-50, no. Carlo nodded slowly, and then he did the only thing he did in that whole business that she thought about afterward with anything like respect. You want the truth, he said. If that paper had gone the other way, I'd have taken every block out of that hole and I'd have slept fine. I'm not going to stand here and tell you I've changed, because I haven't. I just lost. He put his hands in his pockets. That's the only apology you're getting from me, and it's better than most people's. I know it is, Josie said. The letter from Rutland came the following Thursday. It was 1 paragraph. The client withdrew its claim to any personal property situated on Parcel 9 and reserved all rights, which is what lawyers write instead of the word fine. Josie read it in the doorway with the laundromat running behind her, and then she drove out to the pit and sat on the bench in the passenger door with her feet on the rock and let herself feel it for about 4 minutes. Then she took out the notebook and did the other math. She had won 300 blocks of the best white marble in the country. Against that, she had 21 days left on the room above the laundromat, $180 in the coffee can, a transmission she did not trust, and 100 million gallons of water sitting on top of everything she owned. Tova called that night. I have good news and I have a date, she said. The good news is my board approved a purchase order this afternoon, contingent, for the first 60 blocks. The number is real, Josie. I'm going to say it once and then you should sit down. It's more than the building next to you is worth. And the date. The state grant that pays for the north elevation has to have stone under contract and in transit by the last day of August, or the money reverts and the whole scope goes back into the queue for another 4 years. Tova let that sit. I've fought for 4 years to get this on a list. I can't get it on the list twice. Josie looked at the calendar taped inside her closet door, which was a free one from the fuel depot. That's 15 weeks. That's 15 weeks. Tova, the cheapest dewatering quote I have is 6 figures in a year of permitting and the pit refills. I know, Tova said. I've been calling people all week and I keep getting the same answer. I'm sorry, I don't have this one. Josie sat in the room above the laundromat with the free calendar and the coffee can and did not sleep again. She was out at the pit at 6 the next morning. Not for any reason, just because it was the only place she owned. Grady's truck was already up on the bench, parked with the nose out, and he was standing at the edge with a mug in his hand looking down at the water. Heard about the letter, he said. Whole town's heard about the letter. 15 weeks, Josie said. That's what I've got. Then the money goes away. Grady did not answer for a while. He drank some coffee. He looked at that flat black rectangle the way a man looks at a piece of machinery he has been walking past for 40 years. Then he said slowly, and not entirely like he wanted to be saying it, You know we might be asking the wrong question. Josie turned her head. You've been asking how to get the water out, he said. Nobody's asked how to get the stone out. Josie did not understand him at first. She stood there on the bench with her hands in her sleeves and looked at the water and waited for the rest of it. You've got 100 million gallons in your way, Grady said. That's the number that's been eating you for a month. But you don't want the water. Nobody's ever wanted that water. What you want is 300 rocks. They're at the bottom of it. They are. He set his mug on the hood. How much does one of those weigh? I don't know. 60 by 36 by 30 inches. Marble runs about 170 pounds a cubic foot. Grady did the arithmetic out loud, slowly, the way a man does when he wants somebody to follow him and not just believe him. That's a little over 3 tons sitting on the bank in the sun. Now put it under water. He looked at her. Water pushes back. Same block, hanging on a chain at 60 feet, weighs about 2 tons. You get about a third of it for free. Josie stood very still. I've pulled a truck engine off a river bottom with a farm tractor, Grady said. I've set concrete mats on a dam face that were heavier than that block by half. This is not exotic. This is a crane on the edge. A diver on the bottom putting slings around a squared rock that already has a hand's width of clearance on every side, because the man who stacked it meant to come back with a chain. You've been thinking about this. I've been thinking about this since the 6th of April, and I didn't say it because I didn't want to be the man who talked a 20-year-old widow into buying a crane. He picked the mug back up. And then you won the letter. So now I'm saying it. Josie looked at the black rectangle. In her head, she was already unrolling Ottavio's pencil map. 10 rows of 30, 12 feet off the north wall, and setting a boom over the north lip where the rock was solid instead of undercut. I spent 5 weeks trying to get permission to move 100 million gallons of water, she said. And nobody needs permission to pick up a rock. The man with the crane came on a Tuesday, and he came because 11 years earlier Grady had gone into a farm pond in November and found that man's wedding ring in 9 inches of muck. And neither of them had mentioned it since, and neither of them mentioned it now. He walked the north lip with a level and a length of rebar he drove into the rock in 4 places, and he stood at the edge with his hands on his hips for a long time. It's good rock, he said finally. It's better rock than most of what I set up on. I'll give you the machine, and a day, you pay the fuel. That's not enough, Josie said. It's Tuesday and I've got no work, the man said. Don't make it a thing. There were 4 of them on the bench that morning, and then there were 7, because 2 brothers whose grandfather's initials were in the book came up the grade at 7 with their own gloves. And then the woman from the Historical Society parked at the bottom and walked up because she had never once in her life been at the front of something. Josie had the block book open on the hood of Grady's truck under a piece of plexiglass with a rock on each corner. Row 1, position 1, she said. 12 feet off the north wall, west end. 60 by 36 by 30. Grade S. She looked up. Initials RL. Grady was pulling his hood up. He did not say anything. Is that all right? Josie asked. We could start on row 3. Row 1, Grady said. Position 1. He went in at 10 minutes past 8 with a second diver tending him from the surface, and 2 lengths of chain and 4 nylon slings clipped to his harness. The crane sat back from the lip with its outriggers on timber mats, and the boom out over the water, and the hook hanging 30 feet above nothing. It took him 40 minutes. Josie stood at the edge with a radio in her hand and watched the bubbles walk out 12 feet from the wall and stop and stay there, in one place, for a very long time. Twice the crane operator ran the hook down on Grady's call, and twice he stopped it and brought it back up 8 feet, and held. Nobody on that bench talked. The compressor on the truck ran and shut off and ran again. At 9 o'clock, the radio said in a voice made of static and mouthpiece, "That's rigged. Take up slow. Slow. I want to see it break loose before it comes." The operator took up the slack. The wire came out of the water tight, and then the crane's diesel changed its note, dropped down into a lower sound, and held there. It's off the floor. It's hanging clean. Come up steady, don't stop, and get me out of the way. The wire came in. For a while there was nothing to see, just a taut cable going down into black, and then there was a paleness deep in the water that was not the shape of anything yet, and then it was, and the shape was a rectangle. It came up under the surface first, and every person on that ledge could see it before it broke, a white block hanging in dark green water with silt coming off it in slow gray sheets, sliding off the top face and hanging in the water behind it in a cloud. Then it came out. Water sheeted off the sides and poured off the corners, and the whole thing steamed slightly in the cool air, and it hung there off the boom, turning very slowly on the sling. 6 feet of it. White. Not gray. Not the yellow white of an old headstone. White like the inside of a shell. The crane operator swung it in over the bench and set it down on the timber. And the timber took the weight with a sound like a door closing, and the wire went slack. Nobody said anything. Josie walked over to it. There was still a film of silt on the top face, and she put her hand flat on it and wiped one long stripe with her palm, and the stone under it was cold and smooth, and had a shine on it that stone left out in the weather loses. She went to the corner. The number was chiseled there, 2 inches tall, square cut with a small serif at the top of the stroke because whoever cut it had learned lettering. 1. Behind her, somebody made a sound, and it was the woman from the Historical Society, and she said, "I'm sorry." And nobody looked at her because everybody was doing the same thing in their own way. Grady came up the line and got out of his gear and walked over dripping and stood in front of it with his hands at his sides. "That's the first one they ever set down there," he said. Yes, he was 24. Grady crouched down and put 2 fingers on the chiseled numeral and left them there. 24 years old, and he came home and told my grandmother he'd set the first block of the best run they ever cut. And then it rained for 2 days in April and he never saw it again. And he sawed headstones for 26 years and said we left it at the supper table like it was a thing about tools. He stood up and wiped his hand on his thigh. "All right," he said. "Number 2's about a yard to the left of where number 1 was. Let's go." Palmyra came the next morning at 7, alone in her own car, which nobody in that family ever drove out that road. Josie was on the bench with the block book and a thermos. The crane was still there. Block 1 sat on the timber with a tarp over half of it, and blocks 2 and 3 were beside it, and the 3 of them together made a shape on that bench that had not existed in that town since before Josie's father was born. Palmyra parked and got out and did not come close. "May I look at it?" "Yes." She walked over. She stood in front of block 1 for a while, and then she took her glove off and touched it, one hand flat on the white stripe, and Josie watched her do the arithmetic that everybody in the stone business does without meaning to, running her eye down the edge for a seam. "There's no vein in it at all," Palmyra said. "No. My father told me the bottom seam was junk. He told me it went gray at the end, that Ottavio kept cutting after the color quit, and that's what broke the company." She put her glove back on. "He said that at Christmas dinner for 30 years. That wasn't true. He may not have known it wasn't." Palmyra turned around. "I need to say a thing to you, and I would like to do it standing up and only once." Josie put down the thermos. "The 2nd of March was a Saturday," Palmyra said. "We had 4 settings booked in the valley and a customer in the second town over who had been calling since January because his mother's stone was 3 weeks late, and he called me at 5 in the morning at my house and told me he was going to put it on the internet." Her voice did not shake. It got smaller and more precise. The road was already glazing. "Carlos said wait until 9. I said no. I told Enzo to go, and I told him to go now, and he said, 'All right, Ma,' and he went and got his coffee." Josie did not move. "So that is mine," Palmyra said. "That belongs to me, and it is going to belong to me for the rest of my life, and there was not 1 hour in the last 4 months when I have not known it. And instead of saying it out loud one time, I have spent those 4 months being unkind to a 20-year-old girl who lost the same person I did, because it was easier to look at you and think, she is the reason he stayed here, than to look at a phone call I made at 5 in the morning." The wind came across the bench and moved the corner of the tarp and put it back. "He didn't stay for me," Josie said. "I know why he stayed. He stayed because you wouldn't sign his share over unless he worked the yard." "I know," Palmyra said. "I signed that agreement myself. My husband told me it would keep the family together." She looked at the water. "I would like to tell you that I gave you this place to be cruel, and I cannot even have that." She was looking at the water. It was $4 of consideration on a release, and it was the cheapest line in the ledger. "I let you have the water because I thought it was the emptiest thing we owned." Josie stood there. There was a speech available to her. She could feel the shape of it. She went to the truck instead and got a rag out of the box, one of the gray ones, and came back and held it out. Palmyra looked at it. "There's silt on the far end," Josie said. "It dries in, and then you have to scrub it. It's easier wet." Palmyra took the rag. She took off her coat and folded it over the tarp, and she wiped down the far end of block number 1. And it took her about 20 minutes. And when she was done, she folded the rag and handed it back and said thank you, and got in her car and drove down the grade. They took 41 blocks out that spring. Block number 1 did not go on a truck. Josie had it hauled to a shed 2 towns over where a man had a bridge saw he was not using, and she stood beside him while he sliced it. And the inside was the same as the outside, all the way through, white with a faint gray shadow in it like breath on a window. It came back as 11 markers. The first one went to the woman who had sat on the bench in the monument office with a school photograph on her knee. Josie drove out there herself with the 2 brothers and a hand truck and set it. And there was a lot of confusion at first because the woman kept trying to talk about payments, and Josie kept saying no, and finally Grady said, "Ma'am, it's out of the first block. There's no price on the first block. Let her do it." And the woman stopped talking and sat down on the grass. The name on it was cut in 3-inch Roman letters, and under the name it said 19 years. And under that it said the 2 words his mother had wanted and had been quoted by the letter. Josie wrote the whole thing down in her notebook that night. including the mileage. By the second summer, there were 11 people on the payroll. They never drained it. The sounding line still reads what it always read. When people come up that road for the first time, they always ask when the pumping starts, and Josie always says the same thing, and then she has to explain it twice because it takes people a while to hear it. The pit is the warehouse. That is the whole business. 300 blocks and 10 rows on a floor 62 feet down, in cold, still water with no sun and no frost and no acid rain, sitting exactly where 9 men set them in the winter of 1961. And every few weeks a crane goes out over the north lip and a diver goes down, and one of them comes up. They take what is ordered, and they leave the rest where it keeps. Ottavio had it right on a page in ink in 1962, and Josie has that page photocopied and taped inside the door of the shed, where a person can see it while they are putting their boots on. Water keeps stone better than men do. The north elevation of that library got finished in October of the second year. Tova sent photographs, 3 of them, and Josie could not find the patches. She looked for a long time and then she called and admitted she could not find them. And Tova said, "That's the entire point of my career and you just described it in one sentence." And then she was quiet for a second and said, "There's a plaque going up in the spring. Your name is on it, and so is his." Carlo sold his share in the monument company that August and took a job with an equipment dealer in another state. He did not say goodbye. Twice a year a card comes to the yard at Christmas with nothing written in it but his name, which Josie thinks is about as close as that man is ever going to get, and she keeps them. Palmyra comes on Fridays. She keeps the order book because she has kept an order book since she was 19 years old, and she is better at it than anyone Josie could hire. And the 2 of them do not talk about the 2nd of March. And once in a while, one of them says something small about him at the counter, and the other one lets it stand there for a second before answering. That is where they are. It is further than Josie ever expected to get. Nella finished school in June and came to work at the yard, and on the first Saturday she was there, Josie took her up the grade to the north lip at 7 in the morning before the crew came, with the reel in her hand. "This was my father's," Josie said. "You made it the winter before I was born." "What's it for?" "Depth." Josie handed it to her. "Hold the reel loose. Let the lead take it out. Don't help it, and don't grab the cord, let it run through your fingers so you can feel the knots. Every knot is a foot. The red ones are the 10s. Nella crouched at the edge, well back from the lip, and dropped the lead. The cord went out through her hand, cold and stiff, and she counted the red knots out loud without being asked to. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. A pause, and a bit. "That's 2 more feet." 62, Nella said. She looked up. "Isn't that exactly what it was the first day?" "To the inch." "Then why do we keep doing it?" Josie took the reel and started winding hand over hand, coiling the wet cord the way it had been coiled on that bench every working day for 9 years by a man who did not guess about anything. "Because you don't guess the depth," she said. "You measure it, then you know what you're standing over." She pulled the lead up out of the water and it came into her hand heavy and streaming, and the red knot at 60 was wet in her palm, and the water closed over where it had been and went flat and gave nothing away. Exactly the same as it had on a gray afternoon in March, when a 20-year-old girl sat on that ledge with $4 worth of nothing and dropped a piece of lead into the dark to see how bad it was. Josie put the reel in her coat pocket. Down on the bench, a truck door shut, and then another one, and the first of the saws started up. "Come on," she said. "There's a book you have to learn to write in."